Does Microsoft actively hide spyware in Windows 11? Let's find out. As many of you probably know, Windows 11 has a lot of tracking built into it, much like its predecessor, Windows 10, released back in July 2015, and even Windows 8.1 and 8 had some form of active tracking built in as well, so this sort of thing is not new, but by comparison to Windows XP, or any Linux operating system, Windows 11 is terrible in terms of privacy, and macOS is not better. Although it is much easier to disable telemetry and data collection on macOS, and all the free operating systems do not have tracking, the only exception here being Ubuntu Linux, but even then, Ubuntu lets you opt out of sending diagnostic data, but sometimes, it's good to collect some form of data from an operating system and its user, because this can be used as a way to find out bugs, and other problems, but in other cases, if a lot of stuff is bundled into Windows, then obviously, more is known about that individual and their computer, which also means that Microsoft also knows about them, especially if they use Microsoft products such as Office. BSD does not collect any user data. In fact, OpenBSD is touted as the most secure operating system on the planet, as it takes a similar approach to Cube's OS and Unix, in the sense that things get compartmentalized, or separated, so they cannot possibly affect one another, and other OSs such as React OS do not have any tracking built in, even though that operating system falls under the Alpha operating system category, so it is not a very developed OS, but still, it's amazing to see everyone else but Microsoft, Google and Apple not collecting data on everyone. I wonder why? Linux and the open source community have a very strong privacy policy, in the sense that most of them will not freely share your data to advertisers, whereas Microsoft uses your account on Windows to display relevant info and ads on the start screen. I hated it when I saw all these recommended things on the start screen on Windows 10. No Linux distro has that sort of stuff on it, and Google's Chrome OS and Android OS are no better. They also have tons of bloatware and spyware built into them, but do keep in mind that I am using spyware in a different term, in the sense that Microsoft is not directly spying on their users, but rather indirectly knowing stuff about them, because they often see relevant information that interests them, so they often click on it, or use a lot of Microsoft services, perhaps because it is part of their job, but if you're a home user, you should not be subjected to this sort of stuff. You should be able to have total privacy and control over your computer. Windows is still a good operating system, but it is not so much an actual operating system nowadays. It is more like a service, unlike Linux and other operating systems, which still serve as a basic utility, and Windows 12 is possibly going to be coming out next year, in the latter half of 2024. So we will have to wait and see as to whether or not this will actually be coming out, and if it does, I hope it is a good release, since Windows has a long history of good-bad releases, something I would actually have to admit I often agree with, because XP falls in good, Vista falls in bad, 7 is good, 8 and 8.1 were a flop, 10 wasn't good at the start, but quickly gained widespread use, and 11 seems to be fairly popular, but only amongst a smaller group of people, probably the working class of people, and other people, like myself, use alternative operating systems that are not owned by big-name companies such as Microsoft, and yet, the odd thing is, Microsoft themselves use Linux, so why do they do everything that Linux would oppose if it were a person? Well, it has nothing to do with them using Linux at all, but rather, trying to maintain their share of the pie of operating systems, because alternative systems are rising, because of poverty levels rising, and less people being able to buy newer PCs or laptops, but in a country like Australia, most people can afford a new PC, but there is still a small share of poorer people over there too, and since I am not rich, I like to use free stuff, as it saves a lot of money, and in my opinion, software should not be an extra expense you have to pay, especially considering the events of more recent times. While Windows does have some form of indirect spyware in it, as well as some third parties having access to a Windows 11 system, yes, Windows 11 does let some third parties access your system. Isn't that kinda scary? Compared to OpenBSD, Windows is terrible for security, so is macOS, Android, iOS, or any big-name OS owned by a corporation, whereas Linux, BSD, and the lesser-known systems seem to respect your privacy, and so does the free and open-source software, and this is another reason I love free and open-source stuff, because it generally lets you choose your preferred preferences, something I quite like. Unfortunately, the demise of Windows 10 will help Windows 11 grow, only making matters worse, and Microsoft is supposedly shoving more and more ads into Windows 11, as time goes by, so if you are a Windows user, I highly recommend you try Linux Mint, an excellent Linux distribution, perfect for beginners and noobs, and as it looks like Windows, you would find it somewhat familiar, not too scary to use if you're a first-timer. Linux Mint also has tons of great free and open-source software available for it, in the software store, and it comes with everything you need, nothing you don't, so why not give it a try, especially if you have an older PC? Mint could really make that computer run fast again. Let me know what you think of this Windows 11 topic down in the description below, and just so you know, I am not trying to hate on Microsoft, but considering these actions they have done, I am quite shocked, and somewhat surprised, so I thought I would share my opinions on this, and since Windows has a terrible reputation for privacy, I thought it would be something worth mentioning to my viewers. I hope you enjoyed this video, and until next time, bye for now.